Hello, you guys awake yet? We have some really great speakers up here. I'm Amy Liebman. I'm the Director of Environmental Occupational Health at the Migrant Clinicians Network, and I apologize. I didn't get my slides to Dewey until a few minutes ago. So you have a hot off the press presentation. Let's keep you on your toes, so you have to look up here rather than in your booklet. And I feel like I'm also, not only am I an outlier because I didn't get my slides in on time, but I feel like a little bit of an outlier up here in terms of the topic that we're going to discuss today, because I would really like to take a look at some of the migrant and seasonal farm worker issues, but really focusing on migrant youth and migrant children. So in order to have a discussion about this population, and this may be stuff that you already know, I'm not sure, but I always think it is really important just to give some general farm worker demographics. And I also want to say that this is a population where there's some statistics out there in terms of agricultural injuries and what's going on in agriculture, but the migrant population, by and large, we have limited data, although there is some. So I just want to have that qualifier in some of the information that I'm going to be providing you. So essentially, this is like one of our big questions, is how many farm workers are there? And we estimate between 1 and 2.5 million farm workers in the U.S. We do, and this is actually a pretty accurate one, I think. About 80% of farm workers are men, and the rest are women. And I think we always seem to have this image of men, but I think it is really important that 20% are indeed female, and that adds to some issues and wonderful things as well in agriculture. We're looking at a population that is foreign-born, and about a third of the hired workforce are immigrants, and within that, there's about 80% or 71% are foreign-born. So when we talk about our population, I think that we just need to be pretty upfront. We're looking at a population that about half does not have legal authorization to work in this country, and that is largely because there are not a lot of legal ways to enter this country. There are very few visas that are made available to this population. There are a lot of U.S. policies that have impacted this population in their home countries, and they need to earn a living, and there's a demand for their services here in our country. I also think we're talking about kids. About half of migrant workers are parents. This is a gentleman that I met this summer in a farm labor camp not far from where I live, and he was kind enough to introduce me to his child and just remind me that he is here working in the U.S., unable to bring his family with him, and he misses his son terribly. And it's also important to note that, and while they are farm worker parents, the majority of kids don't accompany them. So, and I'll get into this a little bit, but we have a population that's pretty mixed. We have farm workers that are here. Some of them have kids here in the U.S. with them. Some of them have kids that have older brothers and sisters that are in Mexico. So you have a lot of split families, and that adds to some of the dynamics in farm work. So this really, the range I think is pretty broad, but a lot of the money involved in agriculture is due to the seasonal nature. So the average income that we know is about $20,000 per year. The majority do not have health insurance. And we're also looking at a population that by and large does not have a lot of formal education. And that has to do with the public school systems in their sending countries. In Guatemala, free public education ends at about the 4th grade, and in Mexico, free public education ends at about sixth grade. So we also think a lot when we think about the migrant and seasonal farm worker population. We're really thinking about this population involved with crop agriculture. And I think we need to start thinking much more broadly than that, although the way that some of the statistics work and how we talk about things, it's challenging. But the immigrant labor force is now an essential component of the dairy industry. In fact, 41% of the dairy farms in the U.S. hire immigrant labor, and 62% of the milk that we drink is brought to you because dairy farms are employing immigrant labor. So immigrant labor is really critical to agriculture in general, and as we look into what's happening right now, it's not just crop agriculture, it's also animal commodities. So let's take a look at some of the kids with those statistics in mind. We estimate by looking at migrant Head Start data that there are about 1 million migrant farm worker children in the United States. That's just an estimate. And this next statistic is kind of hard because I don't have, of the 1 million migrant farm children, how many are documented or not documented. So I have statistics in terms of looking at unauthorized immigrants in general in the United States. And by and large, there are about 5.5 million children of unauthorized immigrants living in the United States. And about 75% of those kids are US citizens where their parents are not. Why would we care in agricultural health and safety and agriculture in general about the differences in the citizenship status between the parents and the kids? Am I allowed to ask a question to you guys? You have to think. Why does that matter?
Deportation policies.
Deportation policies, absolutely.
Families are separated if there is an immigration enforcement.
Right, right. And often we think, well, if some of the kids are U.S. citizens, they're eligible for programs and services in the U.S. And that's a good thing that maybe some of the undocumented workers are not. But it's really important when we think about kids who are part of a family where there's one person in that family that doesn't have documentation, that family behaves very much at the lowest common denominator. So they behave very much like the entire family is undocumented. And that makes a very big difference when we look at any types of programs and any type of service provision, that we still have US citizen kids that are really behaving sort of as if they're undocumented and further disenfranchises this population. So again, our data's, from various sources, but sometimes we do have evidence of farm worker children beginning work on farms as young as 10 years old. We do know from some of our data from NAWS, the National Agricultural Workers Survey, that about 10% of our farm workers are teens. And this is a statistic that I want to talk to you about too, is that 7% of farm worker parents report bringing their preschool children to the workplace. And that is something that we're trying to address, and we're looking at that. But that is an issue that we need to deal with in agriculture. And so here's just an image. I talked about the dairy image, but here's a young mother working in dairy with her baby. So we do know from some of the data that's even been presented today that about 75% of the injuries to children on farms occur when the child is not working. And so we are looking a lot at a population 6 and under that we have concerns about in terms of injuries that are happening. But the truth is, we really don't know a lot about what exactly is happening with children who are accompanying their parents to work, except that, like any other issues in agriculture, they're at risk because of the setting in which they are, and that they don't necessarily have a safe place to be. So in addition to the inherent risks in agriculture that we're familiar with in terms of chemical exposure, machinery, all the risks that we all know very well about, when you look at the migrant population, placed on top of those risks are risks related to the fact that they're migrant or mobile. They may not have adequate housing. There are language barriers. There's lack of financial resources. Transportation's an issue. Immigration status is an issue. Access to child care is an issue, and health care. So all of these things play into the health and safety of these kids. So one of the big challenges for protecting children while parents are working is access to child care. And there is not necessarily available child care. If it is available, it might not be affordable, and it might not be helping out with them because of the agricultural hours that these workers are working. Like we heard about getting up at 4 a.m. to go to the dairy, and child care is still needed at that time, but it might not be available. And also sort of the whole culturally appropriate aspect where we're looking at a foreign-born population. So there is a program, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it or not, called Migrant and Seasonal Head Start, and that's a program that's funded to serve children 0 to 3 years of age, and it often coordinates with families that are migrating, and it addresses a lot of the agricultural work issues in terms of the hours. Often during the season, they're open for 12-hour days and sometimes even 6 days a week. But only about 20% of the eligible children that are eligible for these services are actually enrolled, and a lot of it has to do with some of the red tape involved. It has to do with what I told you before about the challenges of being an undocumented family. So there's a number of challenges, but I think it's important to remember that we're only getting 20% of the eligible children into a place that would take care of them. So one of the projects that MCN is excited to be working on with the National Children's Center is a new NIOSH-funded project called Protecting Children While Parents Work. And the idea of it is that we really want to explore and promote best practices for building coalitions between agribusiness, child care providers, and parents to address some of the issues of what we can do to protect children while parents are working. And one of the partners in this project and what we'd like to put forth is a really wonderful model in Florida, and it's the Redlands Christian Migrant Association, and they a Head Start. They originated as a Head Start program, but they've grown much larger, and overall they serve about 7,500 low-income kids in Florida from 6 weeks to 12 years through 80 centers and 3 charter schools. This is an organization that's a Head Start organization, but it's also guided in its leadership by growers, by parents, and community leaders, and they provide an environment that's a trustworthy source for both the workers as well as for the employers. And they also meet the unique needs of the agricultural workforce. They have different hours, they have programs, they provide transportation, they have childcare provided during parent meetings, and so there's a lot of really important considerations that RCMA does in order to engage and care for the migrant population, and they're really a community development organization, not just a child care organization. So their success is that they are aligning around a common mission, that's children. They have this shared governance, and they also have diversified support, but they have a strong base with Migrant Head Start, and then they include in their financial stability support from outside grants, state grants, as well as from industry. And so through all of these various mechanisms, including this common ground with the industry, they've been a very successful model, and it's a model that we hope to look at and work with other areas to see if there's ways that we can help foster some of the good practices that are happening in Florida. One of the things that RCMA does do is that they hire staff from the community. They've had a lot of criticism over the years, but they've stood by this, and that they really are investing in farm worker parents who become child care providers, and they give them lots of professional development opportunities, and that assists with providing some of the culturally appropriate care that they do at their center. And then some of the benefits of why we're looking at potential partnerships between industry and this Head Start population or the migrant population is that, number one, we want to look for places where children can be protected while parents work. And then from the industry side, we also feel that there's benefits to investing in the workforce in such a way, or partnering with childcare in order to promote safe places, in that it helps to retain the workforce. On average, farm workers have about 13 years of experience, and they average about 4.5 years of working for the same employer. And working with Migrant Head Start and other entities in the community is a way to potentially help keep workers around and a benefit for industry. And they're less likely to miss work due to various child care concerns. So that's what I wanted to tell you about child care, and I'll let Frank take it from here.
Thank you.